In one episode, Family Guy did something it had never done before. It killed off a main character. Not a gag death, not a fake-out, but a real, permanent, on-screen death of one of the show's most beloved characters. Brian Griffin was gone, and the reaction was unlike anything in the show's history. Fans were devastated, furious, and loud about it. Then, just a few episodes later, Brian was back. Today we're telling the untold story of Brian Griffin's death and return, the real reason it happened, the chaos it caused, and what it revealed about the relationship between a show and the people who watch it. Because this wasn't a random plot twist, there was a strategy behind it, a calculated risk, and the way it played out taught everyone, the writers and the fans, something nobody expected to learn. By the end of this, you'll understand that Brian's death was never really about Brian at all. It was an experiment, and the results were fascinating. We're going to break this down in 3 parts: the death itself and how it was staged, the firestorm that followed and why fans reacted the way they did, and the return, the real reason it happened, which is more revealing than the death ever was. Stick with me, because the lesson buried in this whole saga is one of the most interesting things the show ever accidentally demonstrated. Let's start with the death. The show staged it with surprising weight. Brian's death was sudden, brutal, and played completely straight, with none of the usual comedic deflection. The family genuinely grieved. There was real emotion, real sorrow, the kind of tone Family Guy almost never commits to. And crucially, the show didn't immediately undo it. Brian stayed dead. A new dog even entered the picture, signaling that this was meant to be a lasting change, not a one-episode stunt. For a show built on the reset button, choosing to actually let a death stick was genuinely shocking. And here's the first signpost. The death was designed to feel permanent. Everything about how it was staged, the grief, the replacement, the lack of an immediate undo, was engineered to make the audience believe Brian was really, truly gone. That intention matters enormously, because the whole experiment only works if people believe it. Hold on to the idea that the show wanted the death to feel real, because it tells you exactly what the show was testing. Now let's talk about the firestorm, because the audience reaction was the real event here. Fans did not take it quietly. The response was immediate and intense. People were genuinely upset, emotionally affected, in a way that surprised even the people who made the show. There were petitions, there was outrage online, there was a level of passion that no one fully anticipated for the death of a cartoon dog. And that reaction is the most important data point in this entire story, because it revealed something the show didn't know for certain until that moment. Just how deeply people actually cared about Brian. Think about what that reaction really meant. For years, Brian had been a character fans loved to argue about, the pretentious dog, the flawed intellectual, the one with all the issues we talked about in other videos. But the moment he was gone, all of that complexity collapsed into pure grief. People didn't mourn the flawed Brian or the perfect Brian. They mourned the familiar Brian, the one who'd been part of their living rooms for over a decade. The intensity of the reaction proved that attachment, not approval, is what really binds an audience to a character. You don't have to think a character is good to be devastated when they're gone. You just have to be used to them. Here's the plant for the end. The fan reaction wasn't just emotional, it was informative. It told the show something concrete about the relationship between a long-running series and its audience, something that directly caused the return. Remember that the audience reaction came first, and the decision to bring Brian back came after, because the order of events is the whole key to understanding what really happened. So let's get to the return, and the real reason behind it. Brian came back through a time travel plot device, with Stewie ultimately undoing the death and restoring his best friend. On the surface, it's a classic reset, but the timing and the framing tell a deeper story. The return came after the overwhelming fan reaction, which has led many to read the entire Death and Return saga as a deliberate experiment in audience engagement. The show, intentionally or not, demonstrated a powerful truth that sometimes you don't know how much something matters until you take it away. And here's where the readings split, which makes this even more interesting. One interpretation is that the show always planned to bring Brian back, and the whole thing was a calculated stunt to generate buzz, conversation, and emotional investment, a way to remind a long-running audience how much they cared by briefly showing them a world without Brian. In this reading, the death was never a risk at all. It was a brilliant piece of engagement engineering, and it worked spectacularly. The show got everyone talking, got everyone feeling, and then gave the people exactly what they wanted, all while proving its own importance. The other interpretation is more genuine, that the show really did intend the change to last, and the sheer force of the fan response changed the plan. In this version, the audience and the creators were in a real conversation, and the fans essentially voted Brian back to life with the volume of their grief. Either way, the outcome reveals the same fundamental thing about the show's relationship with its viewers, that for a series this long-running, the audience isn't just watching, they're participating, and their attachment has real gravity. And that's the payoff to everything we planted. The death was staged to feel permanent, specifically so the show could measure how much people cared. The fan reaction provided the answer, loud and unmistakable. And the return was the show responding to that answer. The untold story of Brian's death isn't really about a dog dying. It's about a show discovering, in real time, exactly how much its audience loved a character by performing the one experiment that could actually prove it, taking him away and watching what happened. The whole saga was a love test, and the fans passed it at full volume. Let me dig into why this particular death hit so much harder than the show expected, because the reasons reveal something deep about how we bond with fictional characters. The first reason is duration. Brian had been part of the show since the very beginning, present in every season, a fixture in the audience's life for over a decade. When you've spent that many years with a character, they stop being a character and stop being a kind of companion, a familiar presence woven into your routine. Losing Brian wasn't like losing a plot element. It was like losing a regular fixture of your week, something that had quietly become part of the furniture of your life. That length of relationship creates an attachment that has nothing to do with whether the character is good or likable, and everything to do with sheer familiarity. The second reason is Brian's specific role in the show's heart. For all his flaws, Brian was the emotional center of Family Guy, the character through whom the show expressed its rare moments of genuine feeling. His friendship with Stewie was the closest thing the series had to a real, tender relationship. Killing Brian didn't just remove a character, it removed the show's emotional anchor, the one through whom warmth entered an otherwise cynical world. Fans felt that loss even if they couldn't articulate it. The show suddenly felt colder, and people sensed the absence of something they couldn't quite name. The third reason is the replacement. The show didn't just remove Brian, it brought in a new dog to take his place, and that detail stung in a uniquely cruel way. There's something about watching a beloved presence get replaced that triggers a deeper grief than the loss alone. It's the difference between losing something and watching it be casually substituted, as if it were interchangeable. The replacement dog was a statement that the world moves on, that you can be swapped out, and fans rejected that message with everything they had. They didn't want a new dog. They wanted their dog, and the substitution made the loss feel like an insult on top of an injury. And the fourth reason is the most interesting, the violation of trust. Family Guy had trained its audience for over a decade to believe in the reset button, to trust that nothing bad was ever permanent. Killing Brian and making it stick broke that contract. Suddenly, the safe, consequence-free world fans relied on wasn't safe anymore. If Brian could die and stay dead, anyone could. That destabilization, the sudden realization that the rules they trusted no longer held, added a layer of genuine unease to the grief. It wasn't just sad, it was unsettling, because it meant the show they thought they understood was capable of surprising them in painful ways. Stack those four reasons together: the long history, the emotional anchor, the cruel replacement, and the broken contract, and you understand why a cartoon dog's death produced one of the biggest fan reactions in television history. It wasn't really about Brian. It was about everything Brian represented, and everything the death threatened to take away. So here's the bigger idea this teaches you, about Family Guy and about every story you've ever loved. We rarely know the true depth of our attachment to something until we face losing it. The show weaponized that universal truth, staging a loss so it could witness the love. And the lesson cuts both ways. It taught the fans how much they cared, and it taught the show how much it could rely on that caring. Brian's death and return is the clearest proof that, in a long-running series, the relationship between creator and audience isn't a one-way broadcast. It's a living bond, and that bond is strong enough to bring the dead back to life. It's also worth asking what the whole saga did to the show afterward, because the consequences outlasted the episode. Once an audience has seen the reset button get pressed on something as big as a main character's death, the magic of permanence is gone. Every dramatic moment after Brian's return carried a quiet asterisk, the knowledge that the show would always find a way to undo anything truly costly. In trying to prove how much its choices mattered, the show may have accidentally proven the opposite, that nothing it does is ever final, because the audience now knows the safety net is always there. The death taught fans how much they cared, but the return reminded them that caring is safe, that the show will never actually make them live with a loss. That tension sits at the heart of every long-running series. Audiences want stakes, want to believe that what happens matters, that characters can genuinely win and lose and change. But they also want comfort, the security of knowing their favorites will always be there. Those two desires are in direct conflict, and Brian's death and return is the clearest case study in television of a show trying to satisfy both at once. It gave fans the jolt of real stakes and then the relief of the reset, and in doing so it revealed that what audiences say they want, real consequences, and what they actually want, their characters back, are often two completely different things. The lasting lesson, then, isn't just about how much we love characters. It's about the impossible bargain at the center of serialized storytelling. A show that never changes feels safe but stale. A show that changes for real risks losing the very audience that loves it. Brian's death and return is the moment Family Guy walked right up to that line, looked over the edge, and stepped back, and the whole experiment is a perfect snapshot of the tightrope every beloved long-running series is forced to walk forever. So next time a show kills off a character, watch your own reaction, and watch the fandom's. The size of the grief is a measurement, and what it's measuring is love. Brian's death was the experiment. The fans' tears were the result, and his return was the show admitting it had learned exactly what it set out to learn. In the end, the most honest thing Family Guy ever did was kill its own heart for a few weeks, just to prove the heart was still beating, and the proof came roaring back from an audience that refused to let go. So where do you land? Was Brian's death a genuine creative choice that fans overturned, or a calculated stunt that worked exactly as planned? And were you one of the people who was genuinely upset when he died? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know how you reacted in the moment. If this gave you the full story behind one of the show's biggest moments, hit that like button and share it with the friend who still remembers the panic when Brian died. And stick around, because we've talked a lot about Stewie's plans and his evil, but we've never actually measured the thing that makes him so dangerous. Next, how smart is Stewie Griffin really? We're explaining his actual IQ.